Baruch Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Menachos Ayin Tes, Menachos 79. So the Gemara, we're going to start on the bottom line of 77. Did we say 78? Menachos 78. We're going to start on the bottom line of 77b. Gemara is saying we're just finishing up a brisa where the Gemara is discussing what we learned from each thing. And the Gemara says, what do we learn from? Why does it say taviu by the shtei lechem? And why don't we learn it from all the loaves together? Tamalomer tiyena, to teach us that the amount of the lachmei toda is 10 isranot. My Talmuda. How do we learn from the limud of tiyena that it's to say that the lachmei toda are 10 isranot for the chametz and 10 isranot for the matzah? So Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi tiyena ksiv, because it's written tiyena with two yuds, and from the two yuds, one of them is extra. We learn that the 2 loaves of bread has the shear of an isaron for each loaf, and not two esronim together. So the Gemara says, but ema asara kapizi, maybe we'll say that it's 10 halves, 10 half of kavin. Amarav esronos tiberakos. No, the pasuk was talking about esronos. You can't say it's talking about kapizim, which are half. So then Gemara says, Lamanu asar chametz. Okay, we've learned that the Todah has 10 loaves of bread for the chametz, but how do we know asar lamatzah? How do we know that there's 10 isaron total for all the 30 loaves of matzos? Talmud Lomer, it says al chalos lechem chametz kineged chametz havei matzah, meaning to say it's the same amount total of flour for all the 10 loaves of chametz for all the 30 loaves of matzah. And now Gemara asks a question we've seen several times in Tzvachim and Menachos, something that's derived through what's called a hekesh. Can it go back and teach you a hekesh? So the Gemara Gemara says, meaning to say from the parasha of Lachmei Toda and also from something else, from the Shtei Lechem. Calling Menu V'Davar Acher, we'll have a hekesh. The first thing was not a hekesh. It was learned from Menu V'Davar Acher. Gemara says, "Hani chaman damar lo have hekesh, chaman damar have hekesh." But there's a dispute about this in Zvachim that is considered hekesh. Ma'iko meimer. The Gemara says, according to that one, he says the extra word tavio, which is sabay shtei lechem, is a ribuyahi to teach us this idea about the matzos also are 10 isar. Okay, so now the Gemara, the Mishnah, the next Mishnah is going to talk about the karbanos miluim. The miluim were the inaugural sacrifices that they brought during the dedication of the temple. There they also brought chalos for a mincha, as it states, and then this is what you have to do. It says at the end of Parashas Tetzaveh that this is what you have to do to sanctify my temple. So you have to take lechem matzos, chalos matzos, rekike matzos, meshuchim b'shemen, made out of wheat. And also in Nazir, when he completes his Naziros, also brings chalos for mincha with his karbonos. So the Mishnah is going to explain this idea of the chalos of the miluim and the Nazir. So the miluim, the inauguration of the temple during the time of Moshe, or the inauguration of the Mishkan in the time of Moshe, ba'in kamatzah shebetoda. So the 3 types of loaves that are brought from the miluim are matzah, just like the Thanksgiving offering. And what are the 3 loaves? Chalos or rakikin. These are 2 types of baked loaves. One are thicker, one are thinner. Or revicha, the scalded. Naziros, the Nazir, when he brings his carbon, hatzabah shtei yados kamatzah shel toda. He has 2 portions like the matzos of the toda. Which 2? The chalos and the rakikin. Ve'im baravucha. But the Nazir didn't have the ravucha, which the milu had. Nimtza asara kavin Yerushalmios. So the shirim of the chalos of the Nazir are 10 kavin Yerushalmios. That's the measure, which is. Hold on 1 second. 10 chalos, 10 kavin Yerushalmios. Shein shisha esronos va'odayin. That these are 6 asiros of the ephah and a little bit extra, because the shir of chalos of matzah, the lachmei toda, is 10 esronim. And 2 portions of them are the chalos. The chalos of the Nazir only has 2/3 of that. So that's 6 esronim and a little bit extra. So the Gemara says, Minani Mili, how do we know this idea that with the carbonos of the miluim, they brought three types of chalos, like by the Toda, three types of chalos matzah, like by the Toda, chalos, rikikin, and revucha. Amrav Chizam, Rav Chama Bargur, Damar Kros, based upon the pasuk. It says, Misal motzos asher avnei Hashem, from the basket of matzos, lakach chalos matzachas, one are chalos, the chalos lechem shemen achas, the rakik echad. So bishlam chalos, we understand the chalos are the chalos, and the rakik is the rakik shemen. But minu. So when it says the shemen in the pasuk, isn't that referring to the revucha, the one that's scalded first with boiling water? But it has extra oil because the chalos and the rakikim only had an eighth of a lug, whereas the revuchas had a quarter of a lug. So the Gemara says, "Mazkefar Ravavya Ema Ant de Mishcha." Maybe that the pasuk is intending to say that maybe the pasuk is saying how do we know that's referring to the revucha? Maybe the pasuk is telling us that you have to congeal the oil on top of it, like a loaf of bread, but not that it's referring to the revucha. El the darsh of Nachman Rav Chisda Mishmein de Rebbe Tabla. It's based upon the fact that Zeh korban arona v'anav asher yakrivu Hashem biyomi mashach oto, and then it says v'chimala manu levanav biyomi mashcho. What are they teaching? Ela makish chinucho lehimashcho. So the day Aaron was anointed, we're going to compare it to the chinuch, the day that a regular Kohen began his inaugural service. My mashcho revucho, af chinucho revucho. Just like the Kohen Gadol and his chavitin was revucha, so too at the beginning of the avodah, it's revucha. And so from the fact that the Kohanim began their miluim, it was revucha. So therefore, since they were beginning the service, therefore we're going to see a revucha, and therefore it's extra oil. That's what the oil refers to. Amar Chisda Kohen Gadol hamiskarev la'avoda tzarach shtei asronos ha'efa achas limashcho. A Kohen Gadol who begins his avodah, the first day of his avodah, and the day he was inaugurated, he needs two asronos ha'efa. One for the minchas chavitim that he brings every single day. The Kohen Gadol had to bring a korban every single day, which is an isaron. Ba'achas l'chinucho, and the day he begins his service, he also has to bring an extra. He has to bring another korban, and so therefore he has to bring two korbanos that day. Marbar Avashi Amar Shalosh, three asronos. V'lo pligi, and not arguing. The position of Rav Chizda needs two. The avad avoda kishu kohen hedjot. That's where he already did service while he was a kohen hedjot, and therefore he brings two menachos, one for the chinucho to start the kohen gadol, one for the minchas chavitin. Now, hadulo avad avoda kishu kohen hedjot. But if he never done the avoda for a kohen hedjot, he needs three minchos: one for beginning his kohen hedjot, one for beginning his kohen gadol service, and one for the minchas chavitin. So we would need three. The Naziros came two portions, like the matzah of the Toda, i.e., just the chalos and the rakikin. So Tanu Rabbanan, the Brisa says, it says by the Lachmei Toda Shilamav. It says it's extra shlamim. It says we compare the Lachmei Toda al Zevach Toda Shlamav. Rabbo Shalmei Nazir. This is teaching us that the Shalmei Nazir, the Nazir is also called a Shlamim. So that teaches you have to bring the matzos like the Toda. And Saras Kabin Yerushalmios or via Shemen. Yachol Kol Masham Rabinyan. I might think it has to do all of like the Toda, i.e. 40 loaves. Tamom or matzos. So it's limited. So my Talmud, how do we learn from that? Amar Papa, Davar Shenemar Bo Matzos, something which is called matzos, which is a chalas and a rakikim. Afuke Revucha Delo Nemer Bo Matzos. The Revucha is not called matzos. The Bei Rabbi Shmuel Tana, he says, a different source, different way we learn out from Sal Matzos. Matzos Kolal, Chalos or Kikim Prat. Kal Prat, Emakal Mashaba Prat. We only have in the Kal what's in the Prat, Chalos or Kikin in Midei Achrinelo, but not the Revucha. Because they're called the Matzos. And now on the top of the Mishnah, so now we're talking about the korban toda. We already said earlier in the korban toda that it's chalos lechem chametz yakriv korban al zevach toda shamav. So we learn from here that the shechita of the toda, that's what sanctifies the lachmei toda. So the Mishnah is going to clarify the laws of sanctifying the bread with the shechita of the animal. Hashochet es hatoda lefnim, one who slaughters the toda inside the azara, v'lachma and lachme toda chutz l'choma, outside of the walls, lo kidesh alechem. So if you slaughter the animal in the courtyard of the temple, but the bread is not inside the walls of the courtyard, it's not inside the base of Mikdash area, we're going to say the bread is not sanctified. Shachata achalo karmu panel. Let's say you slaughtered the toda before the, meaning to say, before the bread began to bake, meaning to say that there was like this thickening of the crust. Betanor, afil karmu kulan, chutz miyachad lo kiddush alechem. Meaning to say, the bread needs to be called bread at the moment of the sanctification, which is the moment of the slaughter. So it needs to be in the oven. Otherwise, it's not going to be sanctified. What does it mean outside the walls? Rabbi Yochanan Amar, chutz l'choma space pagi, outside the outer wall of Jerusalem. Rish Lakish says chutz l'choma azara, outside the courtyard of the temple. Rish Lakish Amar chutz l'choma azara. Why? But it's outside the walls of the courtyard, and then it's not sanctified. But al b'samach means next to. Rabbi Yochanan Amar chutz l'choma space pagi, ava chutz l'azara kadosh. But outside the courtyard, it would be sanctified. V'lo ba'inan al b'samach. Mar says, but we already had this dispute in Pesachim. Let's say you slaughtered the korban Pesach while you still had chametz in your possession. You violate a negative commandment. Even if you slaughtered the korban tamid on Erev Pesach, you violate a prohibition because it says you have to slaughter the korban that's designated for me, that's a tamid. Meaning to say, if you slaughter the korban tamid while you had chametz on Erev Pesach, you're also in violation. Rish Lakish says you're only going to be liable if either the shochet or the kohen or one of the people who is there has the chametz with him in the courtyard. But if the chametz is in your house, you're not chayav. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, this is why we have to get rid of the chametz on Erev Pesach before the time where you slaughter the korban Pesach, because you're not allowed to, or the korban tamid, you're not allowed to have the korban tamid, you don't have any chametz in your possession when you slaughter the korban tamid. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, even if it's just in your possession, you're liable, and that's literally why we have to get rid of the chametz. But we have to burn it and destroy it before the morning, before Pesach itself, before the afternoon. So Gemara says, why do we need to have this dispute in both places? Because if we just said this with respect to the shchita and chametz, I would have said Ba'ahi Kama Rabbi Yochanan. The Kol Echad the Isei B'Isurei Kai. I would have said that this was only said by Shochin on chametz. That's what Rabbi Yochanan says. That you don't need it with him in the Azara, because wherever the chametz is, B'Isurei Kai, it's still prohibited. Mikdash Lechem to sanctify the bread. Even Rabbi Shimon. The Isa Bifnim Kaddish, Abrayel Kaddish, it needs to be inside the courtyard. We only had it by the sanctifying the bread of the Thanksgiving. Bahakam Rish Lakish. That's what Rish Lakish says, that it needs to be in the courtyard. But maybe by Chametz, even Mother Rabbi Yochanan, maybe you would agree with Rabbi Yochanan that you can't do it and they can't slaughter if you have it anywhere. So it's Shricha. Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan, we have a price that says like Rabbi Yochanan Shochet Todo Lefnim Malachma Chutz Lachomas Space Paki Lokidesh Alechem. So therefore, we have a price like Rabbi Yochanan that if you slaughter the toda, and as a result, and at the time you did it, the bread was outside the walls of Beis Pagi, the bread was not sanctified. Shachta achlo karma panel. Let's say you slaughtered the toda before the bread was baked, batanor. Then we're not going to say it was not sanctified. Menachos, Mili, what's the source? It Tanur Rabbanon al chalos lechem chametz yakriv karbano al zevach. So Malamed She'ena Lechem Kadosh Elam King Karmu Paneh Batar. This teaches us the bread is not sanctified unless when you slaughter the animal, the bread had already formed like a crust in the oven. Yakriv Karbano, when it says Yakriv Karbano al Zevach, Malamed She'ena Lechem Kadosh Ela B'Shchitas al Zevach. The bread is only sanctified with the slaughter of the animal. Zevach Todas, Malamed She'em Shachtan Shlo Shman Will Kiddush Lechem. If you slaughtered it without intent, the bread was not sanctified. Tanur Rabbanan Yotzin. So now we're going to say what is the amount that the bread needs to be cooked. Yotzim b'matzah na u'b'matzah suya be'ofis. You can fulfill your obligation of eating matzah on Pesach if the matzah was raw, if it wasn't cooked properly, and the matzah that was made in a pot, like boiled. My matzah, now what's raw matzah? I'm Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, kol shaparsa ve'in chutin nimshachen hemena. If you break it and there's no strings of dough stringing from it, that's called raw matzah. Fulfill your obligation. It's such a geschmack to be studying the laws of matzah on Erev Pesach. So it says Rava also with respect to the Thanksgiving bread, the same malacha pshita isn't the same thing. They're both called lechem, lechem oni, and lechem of the Todah. You might have thought echad amar rachmana. You should bring one animal. So you tell parus, command the prisadami, and it's like it's already cut because it breaks on its own when you move it. Kamash muad. And the Lachmei told it said you bring one of them. You bring one animal. Teach us that you can't bring a cut one. And this challah that was not baked properly, it's like it's broken. Kamashma, we don't say that. So we might have thought we don't say it by the Todah because the Todah needs to be stronger, so it's not broken. In Mar Todah sheshachta al shmonim chalas. Let's say you slaughtered the Todah not on 40 loaves, but on 80. Chizkiah Amar kachu arba mitoch shmonim. Chizkiah says 40 out of the 80 are sanctified. The other 40 are not. Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo kachu arba mitoch shmonim. 40 out of the 80 are not sanctified. We had this Gemara earlier. Where do we have it? We had it on 48a. Perfect. Yeah, I remember 30 days, a month ago. Thank God I'm not forgetting everything. Rabbi Zera said everybody would agree if he said sanctify 40 from the 80 kachu. Then for sure their 40 are sanctified. And the fact that he brought out 80 was just in case the 40 weren't there. And so he says, if I lose the 40, the rest will be there. But al yikachu arba'im elam ken yitishu shmonim. If he says 40, I'm not sanctifying 40 unless all 80 are sanctified. Well, kachu, none of them are good because you can't bring more than 40 loaves. Kipligi bistama. They're only arguing where he didn't say anything. Mar savarachra is coming. One says he intended to just be like a guarantee for the other 40, and then it's okay. Mar savar carbon godo coming. He intended a larger sacrifice, and it's no good. Abai Amar. If you put them into, they intend that if you put them in a utensil, they're mekadesh even without the intent of the owners. That's their argument. The meaning to say everybody agrees that he intended that for a large sacrifice, but the question is whether or not if you put it in a klisharis, it's mekadesh without the intent. Mar savar klisharis mikachin, mar savar shalom midas, mar savar klisharis and mikachin shalom midas. One says if you put it in, it's mekadesh even without your intent, and one says it's not mekadesh without your intent. And okay, Repapa Amar Kuli Alma klisharis mikachin shalom midas. Everybody says it can be without tat. The klisharis can be mekadesh. Halacha b'sakin kamiflagi. But here we're talking about whether or not a knife is a klisharis. One says it sanctifies it like the klisharis, and so therefore, even though we intended for 80, the sakin was only mekadesh the 40 that were right for it. Marisavar sakin keeping the waist toch, since the knife doesn't have a inside, ain't a mekadesh klisharis, doesn't sanctify it. Vikadami. Alternatively, Rapapa Amar Kuli Alma klisharis and mekadeshin al midas. That here they're arguing about a knife. Marisavar sakin alima, the klisharis. That sakin is a stronger than a klisharis. V'avagav delays like toch mekadsha, and it is mekadesh even without a toch. Marisavar sakin alima miklisharis. The sakin is not stronger. Here we'll stop here. Baruch Hashem. Tomorrow morning I'll be on the road, so I won't be able to do the daf at that time. Baruch Hashem. Maybe tomorrow night I'll be able to do it, God willing.